We are just 2 weeks out from the Georgia Senate runoffs, and Democrats are pulling out all the stops to keep the state in their corner. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris returned to the campaign trail on Monday to make her pitch for Jon Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock. She told rally goers in Columbus everything is at stake in this election.
People making jokes about 2020, like we want this thing to be over. But you know what? As far as I'm concerned, Georgia, Columbus, 2020 ain't over until January 5th. That's when 2020 will be over. That's when we'll get this thing done.
The vice president-elect knows just how important these runoffs are. Democrats need to win them both to reclaim control of the Senate for the first time since 2014. For more on the runoffs, I want to bring in Andra Gillespie. She's an associate professor of political science and director of the James Weldon Johnston Institute for the Study of Race and Difference at Emory University. She joins me now from Atlanta. Professor, welcome. It's great to have you with us. What kind of impact can Vice President-elect Harris have on an increasingly diversifying electorate in Georgia?
Well, all of the surrogates who are coming out, and that includes President-elect Biden, it includes President Trump and Vice President Pence, are there to rally voters, to try to rally volunteers who will go and mobilize voters, and they're there to get earned media. So there could be notable sound bites that come from all of these events that could be used in ads, but could also be used as talking points that people can then take into their communities. Ultimately, the work that matters the most aren't the rallies, but the hard work that many of the people who are in the audiences of these rallies are going to do. They're going to knock on doors and talk to their neighbors. They're going to ride people to the polls. They're going to make phone calls to remind people to turn out to vote. They might write letters or send out text messages. And all of those things are known to increase voter turnout. And ultimately, given how competitive Georgia has become, whichever party is doing the best job at get out the vote and mobilization is likely going to be the party that wins.
So more than 1.4 million Georgians have already voted in the runoff. But I want to look at the general election. Senator David Perdue got about 1,000 more votes than President Trump, but President-elect Biden won 100,000 more votes than Jon Ossoff. Why is there that gap between the Democratic Senate candidates and the man at the top of the ticket? And what could that signal for the runoffs?
Well, I think it's important to not compare general election electorates to runoff election electorates, though right now, Georgia's turnout is on pace to be pretty close to what the general election turnout is going to be. It's pretty common in elections for participation to drop off the further down the ballot you get. Most people come into a presidential election having really strong opinions about the presidential candidate. They may not have thought as much about the down ballot races, and so some people may choose to skip because they don't have a whole lot of information. So what is important in this particular election is that the people who are turning out to vote do have strong opinions and do have knowledge about the Senate candidates and are motivated to turn out to vote. And so what that means is that the Democrats as well as the Republicans want to try to make sure that they get as many of those election day voters out to the polls again, voting for them on January 5th. If one of them falters, then that's likely going to be the party that loses.
So the New York Times is reporting Republicans are making it clear they're focusing squarely on Reverend Raphael Warnock to rouse the base, not Ossoff. What is the sole driver behind this strategy? Is it really race?
It's a combination of race and religion. I think it's important to know that both parties are running their candidates pretty much as teams, and they're running in lockstep with one another. And both Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff have, received the brunt of attacks, labeling them as socialists and extreme and as radicals. So I expect that we're not going to see a lot of split ticket voting. Democrats certainly don't have an incentive to do it because they need both seats to win, and Republicans wouldn't have an incentive of voting for somebody in the opposite party, even if they're able to retain control of the Senate. But the attacks against Reverend Warnock are particularly pointed because of the racial over and undertones that are involved in them. And then also there's a religious component here as well. Kelly Loeffler has tried to paint Raphael Warnock as not your average Christian by calling Black liberation theology into question and suggesting that while Raphael Warnock might wear the mantle of Martin Luther King because he preaches in his pulpit, his version of Christianity is not like what white evangelicals would recognize as Orthodox Christianity. In doing so, I think she's mostly trying to rile up her base to try to make sure that they get excited and that they turn out to vote. The question is whether or not there's a backlash. So negative campaigning is intended to try to demobilize your opponent's base. But in this particular case, the racial over and undertones of this are things that are really kind of calling the Black church into question that could really set many African-American voters off, in particular, whether or not they actually subscribe to Black liberation theology.
And so how do you then expect the candidates on both sides of the aisle to make their closing arguments in the coming weeks? You know, as you know, this is do or die time. So what are their closing arguments likely to be?
The Republicans have tried to use a Save the Senate message to say that the Senate will be the one bulwark against the Democratic-controlled White House and House of Representatives. The Republicans are doing that, excuse me. And then the Democrats are trying to make the case that, one, they can help President-elect Biden in his particular agenda. And they're also trying to make the contrast between themselves and the Republicans, saying that the Democrats are candidates of the people and that they are empathetic. Meanwhile, the two Republican candidates are rich and out of touch and have actually been asleep at the wheel in terms of addressing the COVID crisis.
All right. Well, Andra Gillespie, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.